That's discussion is when I turn the video on. Too vague. That's why I said it's discussion. You can get down there and hear more information. I have to leave Tuesday evening. I won't be there for the last day on Wednesday. It's only half a day. That's my civilian. I don't have a day job anymore, but I have other commitments. This is coming from the guy who badgers me. Until he finally does it.
Guys, Cena, you good? All right, staff, council, DC members. Okay. Call to order this College Township and Planning Commission joint meeting for the 26th of, a joint work session for the 26th of March. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. It says I'm supposed to do openings and introductions on the agenda. All right, so I guess we'll open up and welcoming the public as well, and then esteemed members of throughout the township and various committees, and as well in COG members. And then we'll just go ahead and do introductions across from my left to right. So I think we'll start with Noreen. Just go ahead, say your name and where you're serving.
Hi, I'm Noreen Corey, and I'm serving on the Planning Commission.
I'm Susan Trainer. I serve on College Township Council.
I'm Peggy Ethel. I'm on the Planning Commission.
Eric Bernier, College Township Council.
Ray Forziat, Planning Commission.
Dustin Best, College Township Council.
Matt Fenton, Planning Commission.
Rich Frank, currently College Township Council, proud former member of the Planning Commission.
Ed Dara, Planning Commission.
Tracy Mariner, College Township Council.
Bob Hoffman, Planning Commission.
Ash Tumans, Planning Commission.
Adam Brumbaugh, College Township Manager.
Mike Bloom, Assistant Manager, College Township.
Don Franson, Township Engineer. Mark Dobrowczyk, College Township Zoning.
Carrie Miller, Executive Director of the College Township Industrial Development Authority.
Michael White, DBZ.
Marina Corey, DPZ.
And I'm Lindsay Shoke, the Township's Principal Planner.
Okay, is that everyone? All right. On to you, Lindsay.
Okay, great. So everyone, welcome. This is our official kickoff to our diving into our form-based code that we currently have a draft in hand. Back in 2021, we kicked off this effort with the Dale Summit Area Plan Citizen Advisory Committee. We met with them. We did a visual preference survey with them. We also did a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats exercise. Thank you. And so throughout the process, we know that Dale Summit is sort of a hodgepodge of different zoning ordinances or different zoning districts, different uses, and we knew there was a problem. So we got the Citizen Advisory Committee together. We did those different analyses and surveys, and decided that it would be an appropriate time to hire a planning consultant. So that's where DPZ comes into place. Prior to DPZ coming on board, staff took a stab at preparing the Dale Summit Area Plan. We then gave that plan to DPZ, and they tweaked it for us, and now at our last joint meeting we held back in January, we went over the plan and we talked about how we're going to move forward with these different steps. We also held a charrette, which was well attended by a lot of folks, so thank you very much. And now tonight, we are going to look into the form-based code, the actual code draft. Marina, Corey, and Mike Weick are here to kind of start that kickoff. And we're pleased to have them here. So also I wanted to note that after this meeting tonight, staff and the Planning Commission are going to have a big task in front of them, whereas we're going to go through the code and, in great detail, and we have a breakdown now of that and how we're going to go through. And of course, those meetings will be Planning Commission meetings, always open to the public. So we're looking for a lot of public input and a lot of community input for this process. So DPZ is going to take over the meeting now, and I'm going to sit down. So they'll have the presentation here up on the slides.
Thank you, Lindsay. All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. And tonight's presentation is broken up into 4 different parts. The first part is, as Lindsay mentioned, a reminder that we didn't start from scratch, that there was a vision plan for the area. The second one is, what is a form-based code? Some people know, some people don't know. I want to spend a little bit of time to explain what we think are the benefits of doing form-based codes, since we've been doing them for the past 40 years. Then I want to talk about how we calibrated or tailored the form-based code for Dale Summit, and then show you just some examples. And I can reserve the examples for the end, for the questions and answer session. So let's go into it. I won't read the Dale Summit vision, since you've seen it, you know it, but I put it up here, we put it up here because we just wanted to remind you that this is a large area and that it's not a blank slate. We're beginning with properties that already have development potential on them or development capacity. There are existing uses, there are conservation and open spaces, there are existing buildings, there are property lines, and it's a very large area, 2 square miles. But it represents about 10% of your total land area, your 18 point something square miles. So this 2 square mile area is really hopefully going to develop in a way that is different to the way you've developed before. And we think it presents tremendous opportunity. So before we even arrived to do the visioning charrette, we did what we call an existing conditions assessment. We looked at the existing buildings, the street network, the sizes of blocks where they do exist, where open space is located, all the open parking lots that exist, and of course, we spent a lot of time looking at your zoning. And we did the zoning analysis in 2 different ways. One was the way DPZ does it, which is just to summarize the zoning categories that exist and really try and highlight the differences that exist between the zoning categories and what we think works or doesn't work. It became actually quite apparent to us that you're actually quite permissive when it comes to uses, but some of the dimensional standards or controls felt a little off. And I'll explain that later. And then, of course, we brought in Gridix, who do this analysis called Zone IQ. They put your entire code into the computer. It's now completely digitized. You can go into any parcel, and you can immediately know what the development capacity of that parcel is, and what the parking requirements would be based on the capacity that is assigned to the site. And they were very helpful in helping us understand what could or couldn't be done on different parcels. And of course, they helped us understand where the inconsistencies were as well. So as an example, here is one. It's a parcel that's 2.1 acres. We put in the setbacks, we put in the lot coverage and the impervious area, and then there's the FAR at 0.1, which is way too low, and would preclude a lot of what you see on the right, which are the redevelopment of that parcel, maybe for commercial uses, but maybe for multifamily, for single family development, and that FAR is precluding any type of reasonable development on that site. So our initial takeaways were here. I know you guys all spoke about it during the charrette. A large portion of the site precludes residential development. We're not sure if that's a good thing or not. We don't think it is. Minimum lot widths preclude many of what we call the middle scale or gentle residential types, which are needed according to the marketability report that was done by Weissman. Density and FAR are a very poor predictor of form, and I'll show some examples of that. We believe that especially when you're at a low scale, 3 to 4 stories, you don't need density other than where it resides in your comp plan. Height, setbacks, lot coverage can control that much better. And we think that the FAR is the most limiting factor to encourage the redevelopment. The impervious lot coverage is also too restrictive, and it precludes small lot development because, for example, a townhouse should have a different lot coverage than a single-family home, right? So your zoning code is too blunt an instrument to recognize that at this stage. Height we thought was too restrictive as well, and setbacks way too restrictive. So you have a 50-foot setback, even for your commercial buildings, which you know what that means. It means all the parking goes in front, and erodes the idea of certain places that could be more pedestrian friendly. So there was the charrette. Mike was here with a whole team of people. Unfortunately, I dealt with my mother passing at the time, so I couldn't be here, but I zoomed in remotely, and it was I heard well attended and a lot of productive information provided, and they worked through some really interesting plans and ideas as to how the area could redevelop while looking at the zoning analysis that was done. And what came out of that community input, we were joined by Jennifer Hurley, who was there as a facilitator, and this is probably not new to any of you who are familiar with what is needed here, but essentially it helped our team vision out and draw up what we thought would be appropriate for the site. So the idea of a hub of activities with potentially a lot of small centers in the area, the confirmed desire for more walkability, and while not every street has to be walkable, you do need what we call an A or a B grid street, which is at least some areas be walkable and the ability for people to walk from point A to point B in a way that is pedestrian friendly and not be interrupted by a street that may not be. We fully recognize that some streets are autocentric, but you do need streets that are also walkable and bikeable. A general support for entertainment uses, indoor recreational uses, restaurants, food and beverage uses, definitely an interest in a variety of smaller building types and housing types in particular, and I'll speak to that as well. The recognition that the need for office and industrial is limited, and of course COVID aggravated that. But the good news is that a lot of industrial uses are completely compatible with commercial and even residential. A lot of cities around the country now are incorporating a residential within their industrial areas, while the industrial redevelops in a way that is a little more pedestrian friendly. And a strong interest in the idea of building on State College's local identity connected to the outdoors by adding trails, bike lanes, walking connections. You know, we arrived last night, we went to have dinner downtown, and it would be wonderful to have that walkability in Dell Summit as well. And a reminder that as we began to look at your vision plan, Peter Bazzelli of Weissman was here, and his team had done a marketability study that looked at a breakdown of if this develops in a way that we think is compatible with what Dell Summit needs, what are the building types and uses that could be accommodated here? So he identified a need for over 850 building types, residential types, ranging from townhouses, cottages, patio houses, traditional rental apartments, regular condos. He identified a need for about 140,000 square feet of retail, 20,000 of additional potential industrial office, and then a hotel of about 100 keys over I can't remember if it was a 15 or 20-year period, but it was a long time. It's all going to happen tomorrow. He was conservative in his estimates, but it gave our team an understanding of what could be accommodated on the site, so that as they began to look at a vision plan, they weren't going to provide for way more density than you were ever going to have, or way less density than you could accommodate. So it's always a good framework to have, and to know that those type of building types could be accommodated on the site. What happened here? Okay. And so we came up with an illustrative structure plan. And there's a difference between a structure plan and a vision plan. The structure plan is what are the rules that should be in place that every developer who builds in this area has to comply with. And so we don't want to make it too onerous, but we also want to give you a framework of predictability. So the black lines are your existing streets. Of course, the one thing that we immediately recognized the area needed was a block and a street structure. And so and you're lucky that the parcel on the right, which is the prison parcel, owned by the prison, the state prison, present a tremendous opportunity because it's essentially a blank slate. So what happens there is going to be of critical importance, but as you will see, we put in what we call the secondary network of streets, the blue streets, which we think should be sort of coded into your plan, so that when a developer comes in and when parcels are interacting with each other, they provide connections where they have to. You could also do that for open space. We've done projects in which open space is identified on a plan such that not every property owner has to provide open space on their lot. They can do that too. But if everybody agrees as to where open space needs to be provided, and there are needs for open space here, because you have the cemetery but not much more, there could be opportunities for greenways and developers contributing to the open space there. So we think those are the kinds of things that need to be incorporated into that structure plan that can be codified and made into regulations. Maintaining the property lines, of course, is really important because we weren't just drawing a vision plan in a vacuum. We often see vision plans drawn in a vacuum as if every building didn't exist. We don't think that's the case. The plan that you see below was a very technically, I think, competently done plan that really looked to preserve existing buildings, assume the buildings that are there are going to remain, but look to see where it makes sense to densify if the FAR was lifted or if additional uses were to come in. And it is a guide. It should be a guide that developers can use. Some cities adopt a vision plan and say if you build this way, we're going to facilitate your building process. If you don't build this way, you can still, of course, go ahead. But you're going to have to provide the street connections where they need to be provided, and you have to comply with the code, of course. But it's just a guide. It's not mandatory because you don't know what property owner is going to come forward now, tomorrow, and the next day. But it's important that those property lines be respected. And so here's the vision plan that first respects the property lines, identifies those central nodes where those activity centers could happen, provides opportunities for greenways and park connections, puts down and when we say urban pattern, we don't mean urban a la Manhattan or Chicago, but an urban pattern at the scale that you're used to, 2 to 3 story buildings, but still a pattern of recognizable blocks and streets, and that really importantly provides opportunities to connect across blocks. So, and as we were doing this, Max was working through his development scenario and helping us we were told to look at this parcel in particular because they have a lot of land in the back and how it could redevelop. And so this site, we know what the development controls exist on it now. And we looked at various potentials of how it could redevelop, whether it's with large building footprints, additional commercial uses, or whether it could be a mix of commercial and residential building typologies while keeping the existing building in place, because the capacity that's on the site, it was not remotely being taken advantage of. And Chris, our renderer, did some renderings of that. So here's the area, of course, and here's an idea of how the site can redevelop. It doesn't have to be this way, but you can begin to see how the buildings meet the street, how parking is hidden in the back, how you begin to get a finer grain of building types that are located in here, how you begin to respect the residential homes that are on the other side of the street, and how you can begin to integrate this large building that has been redeveloped into a greater network of blocks and streets, and where the open space can be provided. We also did an analysis of your streets and really took some sections through them to look at how some of them could be retrofitted. We recognize that some of them have to be dealt with by DOT. We have to collaborate or interact with DOT. Some DOTs are, like Florida DOT has certainly recognized that context matters, and they recognize that urban sections need to be different to suburban sections, which need to be different to rural sections, and they developed a typology of streets that recognize that it's not one street section that runs across the site, but that when you go through an urban area, it needs to be, you have more access, and you may have parking on the street. When you go through rural areas, it can be much more free-flowing, and we're hoping that DOT will help us understand that if these blocks are going to redevelop, and if some of the property owners are going to be asked to develop in a way that is more pedestrian-friendly, that DOT would respond in kind and say, we understand that for this portion, we hope that we can adjust streets accordingly. And so we began to look at how, for example, College Avenue could redevelop. And the first thing we did is said, we're going to keep your existing pavements. You don't have to rip up existing curb lines. And how can it be done? By just restriping, by painting, by planting trees, and it can be done. So this is an example where we maintained the existing curbs, we restriped, added parking lanes, added a central median with trees that could cut in to allow for left turns, added a bike lane, added sidewalks, and planted trees, and all of a sudden, a street like this can become more pedestrian friendly. But we also said, but what if the corridor doesn't redevelop and it stays the way it is? So what do we do with those property owners? And so we looked at retrofit opportunities as well. And so there's many ways in which buildings cannot necessarily turn their back to the corridor, but can recognize the fact that it's an inhospitable arterial. So one is what we call the slip lane, which is keeping the street the way it is and asking property owners to put in a frontage lane in front, allowing for parking in the front, and then the building sits back from that. But the parking for the building is still provided in the back, and there are passages through where you can provide, when people can come through so that the doors are to the front and not to the back, but there's a row of parking that can be provided in the front. There are also other opportunities, which is a complete peel street that says, okay, we're going to create a parallel street to the main street. We may have a row of parking, but now we recognize that the arterial, we may turn our back to it for a portion of it, but we create a main street parallel to it where the buildings are close to the street, it's pedestrian friendly, it's buffered from what's happening on the streets. We just wanted to give you options in case, for whatever reason, with PDOT, it's completely, we hit a wall with them. And then, of course, there's the perpendicular one, which is to say we create places that run perpendicular to, for example, College Avenue. What's the other one called? Benner Pike. That's right, Benner Pike. Where you pull in a green or you pull in an open space and the buildings frame that instead. So there are ways in which property owners can redevelop their parcels in a way that recognizes the context in which they're in. And these were suggested based on what existing setbacks were on the buildings that are along those streets. And then, of course, you need a gateway and you need an identity, and you don't have that yet. So this was just one example of recognizing a green, creating a little node of activity that could be linked to where the future casino may or may not be, or the redevelopment of the mall. And of course, where the Barnes & Noble is and when some of those stores are, there's an opportunity to create a little bit of a hub right there. So we wanted to draw that up as well. Now, so that's generally what came out of the workshop. After that, we began to develop the code. But before we developed the code, I want to tell you what a form-based code is. Some of you may know, but some of you may not know, and some of the members of the public may not know. So essentially, a form-based code is a form of development regulation that tries to foster built results, predictable built results, by controlling the form of the building rather than the uses. And it really focuses on providing a high-quality public realm. The primary goal is to shape public space, and you do that by controlling how the building meets the street and what the space between buildings looks like. You want to make sure that you match the design of streets to the design of the buildings, and you regulate the building form. Now, how do we get there? Form-based codes are actually not new. It's the way we used to build up until, the 1920s. And then in the 1920s, with the advent of the car, we took a radical departure and began designing around the car. We began to design around the car, which meant that everything was separated from everything else. And that's how we got to sprawl. That's how we got to this separation of uses where everybody has to get into their car to go everywhere. And we're not saying that some people love to drive in their car and be in their car all the time, and that's perfectly fine. We have nothing against that. But there's enough people now, more than 50% of the American population, that want to live in walkable environments, that would love to take one of their 11 daily trips a day. The average American takes 11 car trips a day. If one or two of them could be by walking or biking instead of driving, that's a positive trade. And that's a nice thing to afford people the opportunity to do. So as we began to develop this autocentric urban form, we began to separate all our uses. In the 1980s, it began to change. It began to change, DPZ began to change it, but with a lot of other practitioners as well, by saying, let's go back to the way we used to build, where we used to, many of us who grew up walking to school, walking to the coffee shop, walking to the store, with a mix of building types in our neighborhood that were actually quite organic. It wasn't every house that looks exactly the same on our block. We had these building patterns that were much more diverse, but still within the character. We had great open spaces. We knew our neighbors. Everywhere we go, we hear this from people. I used to know my neighbor. I used to engage with our neighbor. And now, we have such big homes and all our activities happen inside our homes. That's fine for some. But many want the opportunity to have an existing community life outside of that. And for those who want the status quo, there's lots of places they can get it in College Township. But there are those who want something different. And in order to provide for that different thing, you have to level the playing field and give them regulations that make it just as easy to develop doing that kind of development and that kind of project that will appeal to a whole new group of people as well. And so the images you see here are from Kentlands. Kentlands is where our office is located in the DC area. It's a suburb of DC. It used to be a farm. It's now redeveloped with a whole range of housing typologies, with a mix of building types, with everything I'm trying to tell you we want to see here, with the idea of something that's human scaled, where kids are free and comfortable to roam in the streets without their parents worrying about them being run over, where seniors are embedded in the downtown and can walk to a coffee shop, where you have better transportation options. And so there's lots and lots of examples of form-based codes that have enabled this kind of development. So you're not alone by wanting to pursue this idea of code reform. So another way a form-based code is different from a conventional code is the conventional codes are very thick in terms of language. They're written by attorneys. Even for us who understand planning legalese, we typically have to read it 6 or 7 times to understand it. It's written to obfuscate things in many cases, to allow developers to do what they want to do, and to make it harder for the community to understand what's being done. So what a form-based code does is try to simplify the language. It adds graphics to make it easier to understand, so a property owner can take one page and say, okay, I'm zoned, whatever the zoning neighborhood mixed use, here are my standards, here are the uses I can do, and we provide drawings. We provide drawings to try and make it easier. But most importantly, we provide public space standards, so that's street standards and open space standards that zoning codes typically don't provide. So it requires collaboration with Public Works, and it requires a collaboration with the Parks Department. So what a conventional code typically does is that it really focuses on use and density. Then there's a lot of information about permit and process, and it may have form standards or it may not. But use is the way the code is organized, as your code is. Industrial, commercial, residential, rural, that's how it's organized. The form-based code takes the same idea, but just says the form of the building is the most important. Is it a large building? Is it a small building? Is it a medium-scale building? Is it facing buildings that are compatible with each other? Permitting is important, the premise is important, the process is important as well. Use and density is absolutely necessary, but it's subservient to the form. The form of the building will automatically dictate what kind of uses go in or don't go in. So for example, you want to deprioritize use. Here's a coffee shop, right? Here's a coffee shop that's in a drive-through location, but it's a coffee shop. It's got parking all around. It's appropriate in some locations, not in others. Here's another coffee shop that's in a historic home that was converted to made to be used in a commercial application. Here's another one in a new Main Street, a coffee shop. And another coffee shop in a downtown embedded in a much taller, high-rise building. And yet another coffee shop in a food truck. So the use doesn't matter. What matters is what kind of building is it going to be allowed in, and where are those types of buildings going to be allowed. So another example of a 7-Eleven. A 7-Eleven, as you see on the right, embedded in a neighborhood that fits the character of the neighborhood, is an asset to a community. A 7-Eleven where everybody has to drive, where it's a bit of an eyesore, is not necessarily an asset. And that's why people tend to come out and fight that kind of development, because they see it in a form that's recognizable. Now the major retailers across the country, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Whole Foods, all of them, they have the Aldis, they have urban prototypes, suburban prototypes, and they know exactly where to go. And you have such a large area that you can tell property owners, you want to be suburban, you go here. You want to be urban, you go here. So that you can give them the choice. So now, density, we always tell folks, density can be done very well or very badly at a very low scale, low density, or at a very high scale. So here's an example in a half acre, it's 8 units an acre. You can do it as a quadruplex, you can do it as 2 duplexes, 4 big homes, or 4 cottages. So density for most people tells you nothing about the form of a building, and it tells you nothing about what types of buildings you would like to encourage or not encourage. And we're always showing folks images like this. So on the left, you have a 12-story building on 4.4 acres. On the right, you have townhouses and triplexes on 4.4 acres. One has an 8% lot coverage and a huge parking area, and that's perfectly okay. One is a townhouse, which has a much higher lot coverage. They're both exactly 22 units an acre. So we try to encourage people, don't only think about density, think about what are the building types you want to allow. Here's another example, a large multifamily, small multifamily with ADU, or an accessory dwelling unit, and townhouses. And we often do these visual preference surveys. What do you think the densities are? And what you think would be the one that has the highest density isn't. The small multifamily on the right, on the bottom left, sorry, is the one that has the highest density. So instead, what we like to tell members of the community and our clients, think about what are the mix of buildings that you want to see? How do the buildings meet the street? Is that mix, that robust mix of building types that you think is appropriate here and that is marketable? Is it walkable or is it bikeable? Is the open space usable? That's what begins to really define how you think of a place. And that's how we began to think about it as we wrote your code. Now, you also want to align density to your housing typologies to your demographics. This image on the left I find interesting because it's only 22% of Americans live in anything that's 3 units or higher. 61% of units in the US are single-family homes. However, the demographics and how we're aging and how people are having kids later in life or not having kids at all is radically changing around the country, and you're probably not any different than any other community in the country. So a few things: 30% of US households are single-person households, and by 2030, 70% of households will have no children. I always have a hard time believing that statistic, but I'm in that statistic. Our daughter will be out of school by then. 50% of Americans want to live in walkable places. More than 30% of US households are cost burden. If you put renters in there, it's upwards of 50%. And Lindsay told us that housing is expensive here. And so if housing is expensive in College Township, it's expensive everywhere else. So that means we really need to be right-sizing the housing typologies that we allow to where our demographics are heading. And so we calibrate your code. And I put this in because this is a declension of urbanism from the rural areas all the way to the urban areas. And you can see some areas have, as you see on the bottom right, 60-story buildings. Some are only 3 to 4-story buildings. You want to provide people with a real variety of ways in which they can live, scaled to what you think is appropriate for Del Summit. So we're by no means proposing 6, 7, 12-story buildings, even though there may be an area where you think that's appropriate. But we're proposing 3 to 4-story buildings. And then, 5 years from now, you may decide to lift it, or you may decide to bonus height in exchange for some benefits or some community benefits for the area as well. But when I say we calibrate for Del Summit, is we say what is appropriate, what works, what doesn't work for this area. And we began to look at the character of your town, obviously comparing it to State College. We know you don't want to be as tall or as dense as them, but what they have is they have very urban areas, very suburban areas, and rural areas. You don't have that. You have suburban areas. And so you need a little bit of urbanism if you want to encourage people to live in a more compact way of development. And by compact, I don't mean denser. I just mean occupying the land in a manner that's a little more sensible. So when we talk about missing middle, it's not unusual to say that our zoning codes have zoned out of our codes the townhouses, the duplexes, the courtyards, often the ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, the live works. Now you're beginning to see around the country a lot of cities doing very innovative things in ways in which they can encourage these types of building types back into their code, because they realize it's a way to provide for attainable housing. They realize that a lot of these building types are perfectly compatible in single-family homes, and to allow those neighborhoods to transition a little bit while still not eroding the character of those places. And not everybody wants to live in a large multifamily building, and not everybody wants to live in a single-family dwelling. There's that middle zone that we really need to enable. And how do you do that? You do that by doing away with minimum lot sizes in areas. You do that by allowing for greater lot coverage. You do that by increasing the FAR. If you're going to have an FAR, you do that by increasing the density, but by thinking about the building types you want to see there. And so fundamentally what happens is that your zoning code goes from being use-based to being form-based, as you see here, and I'll explain that as I talk about the code itself. So there are typically 6 main elements to a form-based code. Yours is the same way. There's a regulating plan. There are subdivision standards, which means someone who has a large parcel that's going to put in new streets or new infrastructure has to think about, well, what's our block structure going to look like? Where are utilities going to run? What type of open space do we need to provide? How much open space? What do our blocks look like? And what do our streets look like? So that's the streets and civic open space standards. Then there are those who develop just a parcel where there's no new infrastructure. So what are the building standards and what are the frontage standards? Frontage standards are important because it's how the building meets the street. Then the administrative standards, that's going to be, I know we're going to have a lot of discussion with the Planning Commission and with the council as well, in terms of what are you comfortable allowing to be reviewed administratively, because you're going to get hopefully a code that is much more predictable in terms of the form that it can yield. So in exchange for developers building by right, can certain things be approved administratively if there are objective standards attached to it to alleviate your burden so that you're only reviewing those projects that are really important or those that are coming to you for variances or for exceptions. And then the definitions. And the definitions are essentially taking your definitions and adding some certain ones that we found were missing. So form-based codes are not appropriate everywhere. Typically, they are chosen, communities decide to adopt them if they want to revitalize a downtown, if they want to enable a TOD, if they want to retrofit or infill vacant or underutilized sites, which is the condition in Dell Summit, if they want to protect neighborhood character, or if they want to develop an entire new town. We've done them for all, and we think they're appropriate. What we can tell you for a fact is that they have been able to do this. So I spent 4 years of my life rewriting Miami zoning. This was back started in 2004, got adopted in 2010. It was the first city where the mayor actually said to us, you throw out every single zone, we're starting from scratch. So we wrote a form-based code for Miami. Now many cities followed suit. Not every city decided to start from scratch. Many cities decided, no, we're going to just go to our strategic areas and adopt a form-based code for here. Some cities decided to adopt an overlay to incentivize it for developers, but not make it regulatory. There's many different ways in which cities have done it. But those who have adopted form-based code standard, and I like to equate it to ripping off a Band-Aid. Initially, it's hard because you're having to learn a new system. But once you get it, it's so much easier, it's so much more intuitive, and for community members, it makes so much more sense because all of a sudden they're recognizing, they're arguing over building types. They're not arguing over 66 feet high versus 70 feet high, or 30 units an acre versus 20 units an acre, and how is the building meeting the streets, and what are the transitions, the stuff that people come to argue over generally. So it does reduce the burden. The fiscal responsibility I'll speak to, it has to simplify the review process. Developers will come on board if they know they have an easier process to get approved if they do projects by right. If they want to do variances, well, then there's a whole new system, but it still should be easier. There should be accelerated approvals and meaningful public benefits. Andres forwarded an article this week about a city in Pennsylvania, the governor of Pennsylvania. Did you guys see this article? Where he put in a rule that said, if you don't, I can't remember where, but if a city that doesn't, those developers were complaining about how long it took to approve projects. And he basically put in a rule, I'm pretty sure it's the governor of Pennsylvania, that basically said, if you don't approve a project within a certain amount of time frame, you have to give the permit fee back to the developer. Well, that city has not given a feedback, and all of a sudden they've reviewed projects twice as fast as they used to review them before. So there are ways in which approvals can be accelerated. And there are ways in which meaningful public benefits can be done too. So you have an opportunity to upzone parts of Dale Summit. You shouldn't do it without extracting public benefits in exchange for giving a property owner additional value. So there's a by right zoning, there may want to be a bonus zoning, but what are you going to do for us? What are you going to do for the community? So 30 years ago, the benefits of form-based codes were not documented. Now they are very, very well documented. I won't read this chart to you, but it is on codestudy.org. Each one of them you can go and read about, but I'm going to show you examples of each one of them. They're very well documented. It doesn't solve every problem, but it really does create more walkable, mixed-use, compact communities. So the outcomes of form-based codes have now been documented by Smart Growth America, by the EPA, by HUD, by a lot of different organizations. And we always like to say you have to talk to the benefits depending on who the audience is. For some people, the fiscal benefits, and for municipality, the fiscal benefits of walkable urbanism are really important. The mayor of Houston announced today that they're going broke, that they are broke, right? I don't know if for those of you who saw that. There's lots of cities that are broke because they can't pay for the length of streets they've had to do they've had to now take over. They're becoming aware that their maintenance, they have to use land more productively, right? That's really what it boils down to. So smart growth can generate 10 times more tax revenue per acre. That should matter to you as a township, right? But only 1% of land in America, in America's largest cities, is walkable. So it's hard to do. It was demoralizing for us to see this because we spend our lives doing this, and we think it's the way to go. But when we read only 1% of the land, we realized, gosh, that we have a lot more work that needs to be done. But walkable areas generate a tremendous amount of tax revenue for cities, 10 to 20 times cheaper to build because you're building more on less land. It generates more in terms of per capita. It generates more in terms of innovations that come out of people who work with each other. There's example after example. So for example, Arlington in our area in Virginia, 50% of the tax revenue comes from 20% of the land. It makes perfect sense because you're just putting more development on less land. So the economic benefits of that are also well documented. But so are the health benefits. So you were telling us today, Susan, the higher density, so there's now correlations. The CDC has made correlations between walkability and our health. When we did away with the useful walk for people, then all of a sudden we started having problems of obesity, we started having problems of asthma because of the congestion and all the pollution. We started having lots of health problems. So greater intersections will encourage people to walk more. You know, when you look at LEED ND or the Leadership for Energy, what does it take to build green communities? What they give the greatest amount of credit for are walkable streets. You can't be sustainable if you're not walkable. And how do they measure walkability? They measure walkability by number of intersections per square mile. The more intersections you have, the more choices people have to walk from point A to point B, the more likely they are to walk. It's just as simple as that. So we know that a higher density of intersections are associated with better health outcomes. We also know it's a more equitable thing to do. So and I don't know what it's like in Del Summit, but this is a nationwide study that essentially shows most people are within a mile or two of their daily needs. And most people, when they do walk, the average American, so 16% of Americans walk about less than 2 miles a day. If some of those trips can be taken by walking or biking, that is an upward trade. Where I live, kids can actually walk to school because we have that in our community. The fact that we now have to bus all our kids to school is a travesty, right? So, you know, the idea of being able to embed certain schools within a community is also good. So helping people understand that if you're not having to get into your car to drive everywhere is super important. And it helps not only from an equitable mobility standpoint, but just from making things generally more affordable. And the drawing on the left is essentially saying some streets prioritize the movement of cars, some streets have to prioritize the movement of cars and people, and some streets prioritize the movement of people on bikes over cars. And so it's important to identify which one goes where within Del Summit. And so when we speak about affordability, there is a group called CNT out of Chicago, Center for Neighborhood Technology. They do this housing and transportation fact sheet, and this is Center County in Pennsylvania. They basically say we can't talk about providing affordable housing without factoring in transportation costs in addition to housing costs for people. Too often we only think about what is the cost of housing. But we've got to factor in transportation too. So when you look at the drawing on the left, or the red and the blue, 27 plus 24%, so 51% of the income of the average person in Center County is going towards housing and transportation. So if you can reduce that transportation burden, there's more money to be provided for housing. And only 6% of the neighborhoods in Center County are walkable. So like where I live in Gaithersburg, it's 94%. And it's a suburban area. So there's lots of room for improvement. And you have the ability to really make some of your neighborhoods more walkable. But you can go into this website and you can put in any county, any city, and it'll tell you exactly what the statistics are. The point of this is the location efficiency of it is as important as the affordability factor. And then of course the social benefits can't be understated. The AARP has said that the social isolation is an epidemic for elderly folks, and they've equated it to it has the same health impact on your health as smoke 15 cigarettes a day. It's absolutely awful. When they are isolated from their own homes and they can't walk to places, they have to be reliant on someone picking them up, or the van coming to take them to the mall, or whatever it is, or they have to downsize because their kids have moved out and they have to leave their community to go to a retirement home. That has a tremendous impact on people's health when they do become socially isolated. So Happy City is a great book. And you know, it's easy to say people are more compact, connected places, are happier, safer, live longer, have great upward mobility, but it happens to be true. You know, and the findings remain consistent across culture, age, sex, initial health status, and even cause of death. It's not to say it's for everyone. I always remind people it's not for everyone, but we do have to provide it. There's a tremendous gap between what people want and what this country provides. So let's provide it for those that want it. And the environmental benefits, sometimes it's for those who really care about climate change. So anybody under the age of 30 is very concerned about climate change. I'm not saying those of us who are over the age of 30 aren't, but for the younger folks, it is really important. And so you can map the impact of your neighborhood, and you can, for those who want to live in an area where they can maybe take a few less car trips a day, maybe have a slightly smaller home, it matters to them as well. So targeting the why you're having a form-based code for those who are interested in the environmental benefits, you talk to them about that. For those interested in the fiscal benefits, you talk to them about that. There are benefits that are documented in terms of all of these areas. And this hasn't been updated since 2019 because everybody's so busy, but over 750 form-based codes have been adopted around the country, are in progress. Now it's well over 500 that have been adopted, so it's not new. You're not embarking on something that is new or unknown to people. And last but not least, there's lots of statewide guidance. Now many states have adopted form-based code guides for their municipalities that want to facilitate it for cities who may not have the funds to hire a planner to come and write a form-based code for them. So they've written books and toolkits and guides on how you can do form-based code, whether it's to address neighborhood affordability, whether it's to preserve neighborhood character, whether it's to encourage TODs. There's lots of guidance that's provided at the level of the states too. So that's my spiel on what is a form-based code. Now, how do we calibrate it for Dell Summit? What came out of our workshops and our work during the charrette was some big ideas for the code. The first one was removing FAR and density and instead controlling density by height and lot coverage, definitely reducing setbacks and increasing lot coverage, being concerned about imperviousness because that's very important, but recognizing that has to be predicated on the building types you want to see here, allowing for a broader range of uses and unit types, allowing pilot projects to have maybe an expedited review process. This was when there was a potential site up towards the Shiloh highway intersection where there was maybe a property owner who had a very large site who could maybe have tested the code. I don't know where that went, but it would be great to have somebody test the code to see if there are ways in which it can be improved, or to see how they can be a test case for this and set the tone of what the development here can look like. Definitely to provide usable and meaningful open space. I'll show what that means, and adopting contextual street standards as well. So we have a regulating plan. It's fuzzy now, but and we've done it deliberately fuzzy because we need to discuss it with you all. But essentially what it's saying is there are mixed use centers, those are the darkest colors, and that's where the greatest intensity of uses would be provided. The lighter color is the light purple, is the neighborhood mixed use, which essentially allows for, it's just less height than what the mixed use center allows. There's the special district business because there are certain uses you really want to control that you don't want to allow anywhere, such as adult uses or other things, where it has to be very, very specific as to where that is. And there may be industrial uses that you want to see here, where you wouldn't want to open up the uses to everything else. So we have reserved special district if there are industrial areas that are going to remain industrial. It's not to say that everything has to go to residential. That's not the case at all. But you should be thinking about commercial, residential, and industrial uses that are all compatible within this area. So section 1 are your general provisions. And so I'm going to go through just one slide on each chapter in some respect, or each section, and then we have the code if you have any specific questions. But I just want to give you an idea of how the code is structured. So the general provisions essentially talks about applicability. Where is this applicable and how it fits into your existing code? What is the intent? The intent is important because it's how your plan reviewers can be looking at a project and judging it based on, is it meeting what we think the vision plan should be? It describes the zoning districts, and of course then also it says how do you deal with nonconformities. But the good news about form-based code is that it really does reduce the number of nonconformities because your use is already quite permissive, and we typically increasing uses, not taking away. And we typically remove unnecessary lot restrictions, which also create less nonconformities in terms of lot dimensional standards as well. The second section is subdivision standards, and it's organized into how do you design new streets, what should your block standards be, how do you assign zoning, what are your planning standards, and what are your civic space standards. It's important to tell people how to design blocks because otherwise there are tremendous blocks that are a tremendous deterrent to walkability. So we carefully design block standards, list what the requirements should be, and provide relief in certain cases. There are civic space standards, which are what are the types of open spaces. So instead of the same way we like to say, do you want to encourage townhouses or patio houses or cottages or single family homes, we like to tell people don't only think about 5% open space or 10% open space. Do you want to see a playground? Do you want to see a green? Do you want to see a plaza? Do you want to see a park? They have different form standards associated with them. They have different levels of imperviousness. You know, a plaza is more paved, a green is more green. Some may have civic structures in them, some may not. So we've very lightly coded the type of civic space. It's always important for a property owner to select the type of open space they're going to do, because all of a sudden it becomes recognizable to people. So that instead of seeing development after development that provides the residual leftover space behind people's lots where they have an expectation of privacy, in open space that is not usable, in stormwater ponds that are just also not usable, you provide them in ways in which people may put walkways around the stormwater pond, or they front streets on open spaces. The most beautiful places in the world, the most valuable places in the world, have open space that is fronted by at least 2 streets, so that it's available to everybody and you know where they are. So we've provided your open space, and we've coded it in a way that makes that open space usable, programmable, and intentional. And by the way, it raises premiums. People who live on open space, their homes premiums are about 20% more than those that don't live on open space. So it's valuable to developers when they do it well, because when it's done that way, it takes away from the privacy. Like those homes there, too often developers think they need large lots because they think that's how you achieve privacy. But you can achieve privacy on a lot with a very small lot, depending on how it's organized. And the back of those homes have 0 privacy. So anyways, zoning regulations. Zoning regulations is the meatiest part of your code. And it has those 12 sections that are listed here. There are some building placement standards. Most of them you know. Some of them are new, like setbacks, of course you know. Lot coverage, of course you know. Building frontage occupation may be something that's new. What that basically says is what percentage of the building needs to be in a place that forms, what percentage of it needs to meet the front property line or the front setback. It's less important in single-family neighborhoods. It's more important in your more urban areas where your commercial areas are, because you want to create that sense of an outdoor room where your commercial areas is, where your buildings relate to each other and have a setback that sort of matches each other. So we have some standards for that. We've also put in some projections into the right-of-way, right? So there are going to be projections into the right-of-way. What are those? And we very lightly code them too. So we want to encourage porches. They should be allowed to encroach, but you want a porch that's usable, right? So we like to say, if you're going to do a porch, have it at least 8 feet deep. Too often developers do it at 4. A 4-foot porch is useless. You can't even put a chair and sit on it. A 6-foot porch is fine. You can have a chair, but you can't be sitting and having across from somebody and having a conversation. So if you're going to do a porch, it'd be nice to have it be at least 8 feet deep. Your builders will resist you on that. You may want to lower that to 6 feet. We can discuss it. But there is a real difference between 6 and 8 feet. And then, of course, awning standards and canopy standards. But it's not a lot, but it's just enough to say, if you do this, here are the rules by which you have to follow. Height is also regulated in a different way. Instead of saying 65 feet, 60 feet, where too often the number of stories is not correlated to the maximum height, we say just think about stories. Most community members understand 3 stories, 4 stories, and commercial may be taller than residential, and that's okay. So be open to allowing the height to be measured in stories and not feet. And of course, there's a maximum height that's allowed. But we want to have that flexibility so that it's not everything at a certain height where every developer is taking advantage of it and then squeezing in 1 extra floor because they can just get it in. And so then your form standards will look like this, 1 page per standard. And it gives you the information that you're typically used to seeing. What is the lot occupation? What are the setbacks? What are the setbacks if you have accessory units? What is the building height? What are the types of yards that exist? And what are the encroachments that are permitted? So for example, put this in because garage locations make a huge difference, especially when it comes to tighter lots. So in a single family home can have a front-loaded garage insofar as the garage doesn't overwhelm the front. Once you get to anything under 40 feet, where a garage takes up more than 50% of the frontage, it becomes a problem because now the curb cut is so much larger, cars are backing out, the sidewalk is interrupted, it's dangerous for kids, and there's no front yard. So when you have townhouses, you cannot have front-loaded townhouses. Now, if you want to have a one-car garage and wide townhouses, maybe. But when you allow for front-loaded townhouses, this is what you get. First, there's no light coming in the front. Typically, then the entry is recessed. And what do you see? You see cars, 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 cars in the frontage. A townhouse is supposed to have the parking in the back, and it's supposed to have a stoop so that people can't look into your home, but it's supposed to just have the living spaces on the street. So we've been telling Lindsay, really hold the line on at least the garage location. Anything less than a townhouse, less than a single-family home, really you shouldn't be allowing the parking in the front because it's really detrimental to the livability of the type. However, there does need to be zoning relief, maybe along arterials, so not every building has to meet the street, of course. And what we're suggesting is, based on how College Avenue, for example, will end up looking, there are many different ways in which the parking, one row of parking or one bay of parking can be accommodated in front of buildings. So depending on what zoning category you're in, if you have parallel parking, you can do parallel parking with one side or on two sides. And parallel parking is always good. If the sidewalk is wide. Then there's head-in parking on the other side. Maybe once you start to get into angled parking on both sides or head-in parking on both sides, it starts to become a greater impediment to the walkability. It just is. People don't like to cross parking lots to get to a building. So, but it's appropriate in some areas, but not in others. So what we hope to do with you is to decide which ones are appropriate where, to decide what the building setbacks should be. Because right now we have them at 8 feet and 12 feet. The maximum setback, and we know that we'll have to lift that in certain areas, but we'll lift that depending on where we think each one is appropriate or not. And then finally are the uses. So here are the uses. We took your uses as they're organized, right? We did that, right, in their code? Kind of, we added a few. Typically we take the way you see your uses, but we group them into categories, right? And we collapse some together that can be together. And we give it in a way to you that's actually quite easy to read. You would see which uses are permitted in what category, just as you see here. And it's organized by residential, lodging, commercial, civic, and all the rest that you see on the right. Parking is also simplified. The parking is tied to the use categories, the graded use categories. There are bicycle parking requirements, and there are car parking requirements, and they are contextual, right? So it's not one size for all, regardless of where you are. In your little centers, it may be that you are more restrictive for parking than you are in other areas. And then, of course, your street sections in section 4 also are very much contextually based. So here's your bicycle facilities, building upon what the bicycle master plan that's being developed that Lindsay has made us aware of and using the same terminology. It's never a one-size-fits-all. That's the thing about a form-based code. We always tell our clients, never one size. It's always this and that and this and that. And the idea of a code is to allow more options, not less options. It's not to take away options. It's to increase the number of options. Just decide where they need to be. So your curb radii is going to change. The width of your sidewalks are going to change depending on if you're in a more commercial area or if you're in a more residential area. And same with the size of your travel lane, the size of your parking lane. If trees are in planters or if they're in grates or if they're in planting verges, all that can change. And then section 5 is your administrative section. It's long. It divides your subdivisions into two types, whether it's less than 10 acres and typically doesn't require new infrastructure, or whether it's greater than 10 acres. It goes through the same type of reviews that you're used to. We are introducing administrative waivers, which are certain things that could be waived administratively because it's easy, it's measurable, and it makes sense. So for example, if somebody needed to provide 40 parking spaces, but they're coming with 39, and it's less than a 5% deviation, could that be approved administratively? Or if somebody can't meet a setback because there's a tree in the way, could that be approved administratively? And we're trying to really define the criteria and what that maximum waiver should be. So there's always a percentage assigned to it or a measurable standard assigned to it. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the new definitions are going into your existing definitions in your code. And I'm just going to end on a few examples very, very quickly so that you don't think that what we're doing is completely outrageous. This happens to be published this week. So I was looking at examples. This is a project done by Dover Cole, another wonderful firm out of Florida, out of Miami, another mall retrofit in which, as you can see in the right here, they're also looking to stitch the blocks back together again where you can and create walkable streets. It makes perfect sense to do that. They're actually being more aggressive than we were in Dell Summit. But you can see that it's the same ideas that we're proposing here. How do you begin to create a system of blocks and streets and the connectivity that is so required by your streets? This is in Gaithersburg, which is where our office is located. It's a huge mall site that is also being redeveloped, where the city is making the developers put in, again, a system of blocks and streets and a mix of typologies of open spaces, a mix of typologies of buildings, and a mix of typologies of streets. And then Norton Commons, we've discussed this with you all before, but with Lindsay as well. We put this in because you can see the old, the conventional development and then the new development, which we just happened to have a client commission the study of 11 or 10 new urbanist communities compared to their adjacent suburban communities. In every single case, the new urbanist community, not only by DPZ, by many others, outperforms the conventional one. And this one outperforms it on a per square foot basis by more than 70%. And the power of charrette drawing. So I showed you your gateway drawing that Chris, our renderer, did. He did this one in 1997. He drew that at the charrette, and that's how it got built. And we have so many examples of that. When there's a vision plan that inspires people, and there's a code that enables it, it can actually get built that way. So even when you see drawings that may seem completely outrageous, it's not to say it can't really be built that way. And at least the intent of it be met through drawings. So, and this is Norton Commons. It has everything that we think you should have. So the mixed-use center that we're envisioning for you is at this scale, 3 to 4 story buildings, absolutely maximum, with the parking in the back, with the buildings meeting the street. And here's examples of what those mixed-use center buildings can be. They can be neighborhood center buildings with where you have mixed use, commercial on the ground floor and residential or office above. They can be live-works, which are fee-simple units where you're working below, living above, or working below, renting above, all sorts of options that can be provided. There are corner stores, and there are town center buildings that have a little more heft to them. Then you can see the graduation in intensity from the center core to the mixed-use neighborhoods, where you begin to see a greater mix of building types, where you begin to see greenways coming into the site, which we think are perfectly appropriate in Dell Summit as well, where you see parking is hidden behind the blocks, where you see detached garages and attached garages, and a mix of building types on the lots themselves. And then the amenities in the open spaces, always fronted by, the amenities are in prominent locations. There are opportunities to provide for extra open space where people can come and gather, whether it's cottage courts, which are very popular with seniors because they happen to have more time on their hands and they want to be able to sit and talk with their neighbors, or greater greens, as you see here, where there's an opportunity to set back some of the units, or, of course, places where you can play bocce or whatever in smaller, more private areas in the neighborhood. And then the different building types that should be and are appropriate for this area: detached homes, triplexes, cottages, townhouses, even side yard types, and porches, once they're deep, can be really magical and really function as an outdoor room, which during COVID, of course, became a really useful thing to have an outdoor room that you can live in, where you can converse with your neighbors at a distance, but still feel and be safe. And then the multifamily, and I want to show this multifamily because you see the townhouses on the left, you see the multifamily on the right. The parking is hidden, they meet the street, and they create, a wonderful environment. And multifamily can be really nice if it's embedded in a downtown, and people will willingly trade a home for a smaller unit if they can walk to the coffee shop, walk to the grocer, walk to their grandkids, walk to whatever use is there. In this case, it's a pool. And that's it. So happy to answer questions you may have. That's a general overview of what we hope this code will do for you.
Okay. Ready for questions? Who wants to lead off with questions? Does staff want to lead off with any questions they have or clarifications, things to add?
Go ahead, Adam.
If I may. The only thing that I think is important for everyone here to understand, we're in the process of developing this code, and I think that it is clearly indicated that this code will basically become what the Planning Commission and Council envision it to be. But I also think it needs to be said that should we be making these types of changes, that ultimately this is a very long period of redevelopment activity for a major portion of the Dale Summit area. Over a 20, a 30, a 40 or more year period. A lot of what was shown here is phenomenal, in my personal opinion. Great work, very pleased with that. But realistically, I think everyone needs to understand that this is a very long-term objective. It's a very long-term movement forward. And I think that we need to keep that in mind. Because a lot of changes that have been proposed in the past have either been quick fixes, which is one of the reasons why we have gravitated toward a more holistic approach. But they have tended to be quick fixes, and the results are seen very quickly. While there is potential for results to be seen relatively quickly, this is very much a long-term project. Years and years and years in the making. So I just think that that is very important for both PC and council to hear, as well as members of the public that might be hearing some of this for the first time. So that was the one thing I just wanted to throw in here. And I don't know if, Marlene, if you have any comments relative to that in terms of overall period of time where some of these ideas, how long it typically takes to begin to see some of those types of results.
Well, you have, the Peter Bozzetti's report said essentially over a 15 to 20 year period, I think he imagined the build out of this place happening. But, you already have, you have two, and I'm going to show you on a map here of your existing conditions. Sorry, let me just go here. Yep, and I'm going to zoom in here. There was a potential for redevelopment here, and of course you have the housing that happened here. And the housing that happened here is a perfect example of 3 housing projects that happened independent to each other. They could have tied back to each other. It's a lot of units. So what I'm talking about here, you shouldn't be afraid to dream big. You're not going to be asking for something that's out of the ordinary here. You're asking for buildings to meet the street properly. You're asking for open space to be provided in a reasonable manner. You're not going to control we're staying away from trying to control the architecture. So it's not asking for a lot to say, give us usable open space, give us building types that, it would have been wonderful when this was designed, because it's a lot of development, right? And some of it's actually not bad, but to have been done in a way that is just slightly more pedestrian friendly. So even little plots that develop, you can begin to ask for this right away. So that so that as the area redevelops and builds, and as there's momentum around the redevelopment of the mall, potentially, it presented a great opportunity for you. So don't. I wouldn't be shy about it.
Okay.
Thanks for your presentation, and I appreciate, since we've really been undertaking this whole process, the open-mindedness of the Planning Commission and council members. So I hope with this kind of help you kind of get a better understanding of what we're looking to do. So that's my input.
Just kind of build off what both Adam and Lindsay referenced. So tonight is really about your discussion, your questions, your answers. What us as staff are going to be doing is in preparation for setting the stage for Planning Commission to kick off their discussions and really do the deep dive into the code that that Lindsay referenced at the beginning, is looking for themes. Things that we hear out of you, concerns or issues or things you want to investigate a little bit deeper, that can be woven into a remand letter from council to Planning Commission that sets that stage for Planning Commission to do their work. Gives a little bit of guidance and trajectory for you to start. So that's really what tonight's about. The end goal for us is to find those themes and start building that trajectory that council can provide back to Planning Commission for, here's how you start the work, and let's continue this discussion moving forward.
Okay. All right. Susan's going to be the first one in, and then we'll just take turns after that.
So thank you very much. It was a lot that you brought forward, but it's exciting. And, you know, I think you made the point nicely that without a vision, we don't have a place to go. So I think that this isn't a marriage commitment to the vision, but it is some idea of the vision, which I really appreciate. Because I think what I understand from the process here, going back to, I think it was the Citizens Advisory Committee, going back several years, there's been a long-term commitment in the township to doing something up in that area. And clearly the residents talk a lot about, you know, things kind of stop by Old New York if you're looking for something to eat or brother. So even just getting out to go someplace and trying to envision where we could go for things like, you know, recreation, looking at the mall, the potential of the mall. So I was looking at the October Dale Summit, it's the Dale Summit Area Plan Report that we got in October. And one of the things that came up under the marketability study was that there was this idea of phasing. You know, phase 1, phase 2, and then putting that together with this map where we see these nodes and these hubs that are sort of defined by looking at the sort of urbanism of each node, so not necessarily jumping in and committing to a fully urban development area, but the commitment to a small-scale phase development that would allow us to really cut our teeth on this, but learn some lessons, apply things, and also look at how could we, you know, develop that and create those spaces that just, they don't even exist in the center region. We don't have, you know, Rich, you had talked about going to a casino development, I think in Bethlehem, a long time ago we talked about that, and it was, you know, at 10 o'clock at night, the casino was open, but there was music, there was restaurants, the food was good. You know, where do we go in College Township at 10 o'clock at night to listen to good music and get good food? We don't have a lot of options. We go home, we go to our single family houses and we shut the door, and, you know, we're isolated. So, you know, I think the idea of phasing is very compelling to me, because it doesn't force us to commit to something that might be too overly ambitious that people would pull back from. And this is not like anything in the center region. This gives us a chance to be innovative in a way that I don't think anybody else has yet jumped for. So.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing to that real quick? Well, and it goes to Mike's point too. When I first came to interview for this job, I stayed at the Hilton or the Holiday Inn, I can't remember, right down the street. And there was this massive multifamily project being built across the street up on a hill. And I saw that multifamily project, and then I see the multifamily going in here, and it made me think, kind of was in the wrong location because they can't walk anywhere. There's a market now, here. If they're building multifamily there, that means there's a market here, right now, for that kind of housing. And every other size as well. So there's a pent-up demand for it.
Yeah, I'll just add far to that. I work with a young woman. I just talked to her literally yesterday. She's a young professional, lives in State College, but she looks like she could still be in college. And there's actually a fair demographic of that in here. And they complain, and her chief complaint was it is so hard for her to find housing. She doesn't want to live in a single-family home. She doesn't want to afford it. She's single. She doesn't want to live in a college dump. She doesn't want to live downtown where it's surrounded by college kids. And she still wants to, you know, be able to walk and enjoy type of things. So, you know, that definitely is a market that is somewhat available here. And I feel like that demographic almost feels like there may not be a place for them in this town. It's either people that have kids and families, or it's college students.
Or retired.
Or retired.
Or retired, yeah.
Yep.
I think one of the things that you pointed out in this whole thing is how land should be used in a better fashion. Because basically, if you look at our existing zoning, with our setbacks, also with the development up in by the mall, also where Walmart and Sam's is, there's a lot of land up there that is not used very wisely. Because we have huge parking lots. Half of the parking lots are never used. So there could be a better utilization of the land. The area that goes out Shiloh Road, if you look at density of our existing zoning, you're not really giving the developer enough density to make the thing. They're all looking for profitability. So the profitability isn't the greatest thing that they can have. They can't put in all kinds of different units, because basically if you look at like Gaithersburg or some of the suburban areas, they have rings. So you may have commercial, you may have the townhouse, you may have the apartments, and you have a ring, and you have something in the center to draw everybody to. So I think, going this route will give us more of a productive development, and it can be controlled by what we're looking at here. And it also gives developers the incentive to come here. Because right now, we are seeing the national developers coming to State College. All the student housing stuff is not local people anymore. It's all national developers, and they're used to putting real dollars into projects. They are not financing these things at 80 to 90% of cost. They put real money in, and they want real profits. And they put in quality stuff.
Anyone else? Eric?
Sure.
Well, I know you've been waiting.
Well, first of all, I agree with everything you said, Susan said, and Ed said. I mean, we're on the map. All those national housing developers know where State College is, for sure. But I want to say, what an excellent presentation.
Right, yes.
I mean, that was so much information in an hour, in a concise yet very digestible manner, that I feel so much smarter now.
Thank you, that's very sweet.
I'm not. When I go home, I'll be.
Well, you can think that.
But, that was really good. And, I was like everyone, a little anxious about form-based code because of the unknown. But listening to you and understanding how much it dovetails with sound, modern planning principles, the pedestrian order, everything that we're striving to do and are having so little success with our traditional approach. And to Adam's comment, I guess I'm less concerned about the time frame, because I've been involved in this room for over 25 years with land development plans, and we really haven't done that much in 25 years out there. So if it takes us another 25 years to get to something like this, that is so much better, at least in my opinion, I'm okay with that. I'll be long gone by then, but like Susan said, the baby steps and adjust on the way. To what Mike is asking for, maybe a couple of comments. Two, the market analysis that we did a year or so ago, that was really good information too, and I'm so glad that that was done at the beginning. If there's an opportunity to just revisit that or update that and reconcile that against, where we are right now, that might be beneficial. I don't know if that's in the cards or, what that entails. But I found that to be extraordinarily valuable as we started this process. And then the other thing is, you guys have done a lot of this, obviously, in blank canvases and in redevelopments. So I would ask you, given that we have mostly redevelopment and some blank, what do you consider the approach, what do you consider the biggest challenges that we're going to face in the areas of redevelopment? In other words, we kind of have an outline of an approach here. Where do you see in that outline where we might struggle a bit or we might have a challenge based on your experience in the past? And where do you think in this we might be a step ahead of everyone else because of the layout? And I think what that'll do for us is give at least me an opportunity to then focus more on the details of those areas. Because all of this is looks great, but without the context, I hate to even offer a comment.
Yeah.
But with a little bit of that context might be more helpful for us. But thank you very much.
Well, thanks, and you asked some very good questions. So there's a couple of responses to what could happen first or second. As I mentioned before, so there's a couple of real opportunities right away. One, of course, is the prison site, where they may not be interested in redeveloping, or they may be interested in redeveloping. That's on the edge of the property, but since it is a blank slate, it presents a tremendous amount of opportunity. I think your gateway around here, where the Barnes and Noble is, where the existing McDonald's is, I can't remember if it's a McDonald's or a Burger King, but this area, as we showed in the rendering, there's opportunities depending on how how amenable PennDOT is to retrofitting some of those streets. There's opportunities to begin to create a center place. Whether the casino goes in there or not, whether the mall redevelops or not, there's also an opportunity there. So in this general area, I think you'll probably see some opportunities. Behind the Corning site, maybe a little bit in front of it, there may be opportunities. And then, of course, there's this big parcel, and I don't know if I should or shouldn't talk about it, but there's a property owner here or developer who has potentially expressed an interest in it. We've been hoping he would test the code, but we would really hope that because it's one of the largest pieces that you have here, so hopefully this will set the tone, and we would encourage you to hold the line, and not allow them to not have block structure or to do front-loaded townhouses or stuff that would really miss an opportunity to really showcase what can be done, especially since you've got the existing residential here. They have an opportunity to create a central green, and they have an opportunity to do way more development on that site than they were coming in for, which we were telling Lindsay. It's like, why wouldn't they be open to that? So those are the three areas that I think are immediately of importance, right? Or could begin to plant a kernel of what can happen.
Okay, so that's what I was looking for, things that I can start with the details in those areas.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Dustin?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think you're gonna run into, and this is just being here for 40 years, is I think, is State College area ready for an increase in density and something different? And I think that's gonna be one of the things that we're gonna have to be very careful of how we do things, how we explain things, because this is gonna be totally different than all the other developments that have been done in this general area. So I think you're gonna see not a lot of resistance, but you're gonna see resistance because it's new.
Well, State College has good urbanism. So and Lamont has good urbanism, and it's two very different levels of density, but they both have buildings that meet the street in the right way, that have sidewalks that are continuous. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for good urbanism. You will decide at what scale you want that density. Mike's reminding me that the core, the darkest purple area we had suggested 5 stories. Either way, even if you increase the FAR, or the property owners are going to be allowed to do much more than they were allowed to do before. That's creating value right off the bat. You may decide you can extract some of that value through allowing certain places to go slightly taller in exchange for a whole host of benefits that you know you need, or community benefits that you know you need. And you may encourage property owners to work together. And I know this is a level of density that is very different to what you have here, but there is a development. I encourage you all to go look at it online. It's called Pike and Rose. It's in Rockville, Maryland. And it was a collaboration between the Montgomery Planning Department, Montgomery in Maryland and not in Pennsylvania, and a few big property owners. And they came together and they did a structure plan, not unlike this one. They assigned heights, they assigned densities, they assigned capacity, they assigned open space. They forced property owners to work together. The property owners came willingly to the table, and they did an amazing. It was a strip commercial mall. You're mentioning Sam's and Walmart and all of that. It was exactly like that, and they redeveloped it into a beautiful urban area. It's won all sorts of awards. The density is not what's appropriate here, but the idea behind it and the way the planning commission and and city staff, county staff worked with the developers is a really good model to look at.
Yeah.
The examples you gave of Kentucky and the home prices, is that like a suburb of city in Kentucky, or?
Yeah, but we have them from all over the country.
But is that like Louisville?
Yeah, it's right outside Louisville.
Okay.
Could we get a list of them?
Yeah, we can also, so our client commissioned it, we got the information literally yesterday. I can ask him if I can make it available to you all. We already have other examples from our other communities, but this one happened to include non-DPZ communities, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we can share it with you, just to show you consistently, and we already have this information from a lot of other places, but consistently how good urbanism will command better prices per square foot.
So what would the timeline be in getting this information?
Well, as I showed you before, you can, well, some of this I can provide immediately to Lindsay. The information we got today was from a private developer who owns 800 acres and was redeveloping and wants to show his shareholders how it makes sense. He commissioned, actually Peter Bazzelli, who did your study, to go and look at 10 or 12 new urbanist communities and the sister communities right next to them to see how they compared in price. And I was even amazed at the consistency of it. But there is one I can send to you immediately, which was commissioned by the EPA about 10 years ago now. But they did the same thing, looked at those kinds of communities and how they benefit. And Smart Growth America did one on the economic benefits of smart growth, and it's about a year old. So I will send that to Lindsay too. There's stuff I can give you immediately.
And the rest?
And the rest, well, the only one I don't know if I can is the one that our client commissioned. I'm sure he'll be okay with us giving it to you because, I mean, you're a city, it's not a problem, it's not as if you're competing with him. So I think it'll be okay, but we just have to ask him.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
But there's already a lot of information. We'll make sure we give Lindsay.
Yeah, Adam.
One of the things, getting back, or harkening back to what Eric had been asking about, one of the things that staff has identified that we think is going to be a challenge in this, and especially in a pure form-based code construction or structure, is block structure. I think that's something here that, as we delve into some of this, it's going to be very different than what we've dealt with before. I think it will, I don't know, we just feel from a staff perspective that is going to be very different from our typical pattern of development and the way that we have done things here. And I don't know if you feel, if you have any comments that you might want to make relative to that. That's one of the things that staff believes is going to be a real challenge here, and may be an area where we end up in more of a hybrid type situation. But
so Mike, I'll let Mike talk to Kirkwood. He's giving me he's whispering to me one we should talk about. But all I can tell you is, it is not hard on an empty parcel to create a block structure and a street structure, and you have to have it to have a walkable community. And it is not hard to ask a developer to follow a block pattern, and give them the code on block standards and tell them, why can't you meet this? As an example, right? Try meet it. And if you can't meet it, you have to have a valid reason why. And it really needs to meet the intent of the code. There's always reasons why people can break the code. But if you don't have a block structure and you don't have a recognizable street pattern, then you don't have a walkable community. And so that is something that to me would be a non-negotiable. Yes, developers understand it. If you're dealing with local builders who've only built here, maybe, but any national developer coming in here knows exactly what a block structure is and what street standards are. They know how to do rear-loaded townhouses. They know how to do front-loaded townhouses. They know how to do rear-loaded multifamily buildings. They know how to do street-facing multifamily buildings. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to them. It will be a departure, but as an example, just that one property I was pointing to up here, there's tremendous opportunity there. There's tremendous opportunity to do way more than what they were coming forward with. And so hopefully they come willingly to the table to try explore that as an idea. And if they only wanted to do the amount of development that they had planned for, great. But then they can do it on a third of the land and reserve the rest for later. But it will be an adjustment. But you will have developers tell you, forget it, the market's not ready for that. Yes, it is. Go build elsewhere. We're going to hold this standard because we think that this area can be different.
And it's one of the benefits that you can extract by them getting exponentially more developable capacity of it.
Yeah, so what Mike was mentioning is we did a plan for downtown Kirkwood, Missouri. Now, they have a beautiful downtown, but they also had very large industrial areas. And we did the exact same thing. We put in a structure of blocks and locks for them in a recognizable way, and they're moving forward with it.
Which was much more challenging because they had much less to work with. You've got a blank slate.
Well, I guess maybe I should have qualified my concern about the block structure. Block structure, I agree. I mean, it's elemental to the type of thing that form-based code is all about. In terms of revitalization, redevelopment, I think working with existing property owners and developing on their existing sites these block structures is going to be something that is very different than what they have ever encountered before. And I think that could actually be, in some cases, very challenging for those owners to deal with.
Yeah, and you'll see when you look at the master plan that was drawn, the illustrative plan, in some cases, a smaller property may only have one street that goes through it. Now, whether the street is where the master plan shows it or slightly off, as long as they meet the general block pattern, they can do whatever they want, right? And there are some properties that will not need to put in street. There are multiple properties that will redevelop that don't need to put in any streets at all. What may be a challenge is that once somebody does put in a street, that you require that the next property owner connect to that street. But those are the things that if they know ahead of time, this is what we have to comply with. And in exchange, by the way, yes, we're going to make you do things you haven't done before, but we're also going to facilitate things for you. We're making more uses available. We're increasing your development capacity. We're hopefully streamlining your permitting process. We could be reducing parking requirements because you're not going to have a parking problem here anytime soon. So all those things are benefits to property owners. And they should, whoever said they should be making it, absolutely developers should make a profit. As we all work for a living, we all work for a profit, they should make a profit too. But their project should leave Del Summit better off and not worse off. That's really the exchange, the difference.
So it's like sidewalks on a larger scale?
Yeah, why not?
Well, and I think, sorry,
No, that's okay.
No, I think, we're talking about the business of development, and I think that's important, but I think the health impacts of creating more walkable areas in our township are significant. I mean, there was a study released in October of 2023 that showed a more walkable township reduced, obesity-related cancer risk in postmenopausal women by 26%. That's significant. 1 in 3 people right now in the U.S. have prediabetes. They don't know they have diabetes. And if they don't do something about it, and that's typically first, lifestyle, walking, moving more, we're going to see an explosion of diabetes that makes what we have today look very, very small. And the long-term cost impact of those health changes will dwarf a lot of the problems that we have today. So it's a little ahead, and most people don't change behavior for future reward. They want the reward now, I get that. But it is something to think about. And, in our community, the hospital system has to survey the community every 3 years. So the catchment area for Mount Nittany Health has to be surveyed. It's a very extensive survey. It's done every 3 years. It's to help them maintain their nonprofit tax status, and it's been done every 3 years since 2013. And our community has told us consistently every cycle that they want more resource for chronic disease and obesity-related disease, more resource to deal with the 20% prevalence of diabetes we have in our region. So if we're going to do something and have a real impact on health, some of the best impacts we can have on health aren't in the hospital system, they're in the development that we do as a township. So this is an opportunity to really have a significant impact long-term. And sort of to your point, Eric, we won't be here in 25 years, but the health impacts of what we do will be here in 25 years. And that also will improve property values in the area. So.
Especially any of us who are in that 25% of the diabetic.
1 in 3.
Mike, was it on the street layout?
It's block structure
the block
related.
structure.
Sorry, before we jumped off of that, one of the things that I know as we've had some preliminary discussions on it, the question that I have is in terms of block structure, the scalability of the regulation. Ultimately, we'd be looking to you and your expertise to talk about, can we go bigger, can we go smaller, without losing the underlying intent of what the block structure is. Recognizing some of the size of parcels that we're dealing with out here and development patterns, that may be something where when you look at the block standard as it's written, seems rigid, but, if there's a scalability to it, that answers the question. So.
Well, it's already much more permissive than where it typically is. Like, in many places, we limit it to 1,600 square feet. But how do we come up with a number? We look around here at the general block structure and try to think, what's a reasonable number? And then we gave you lots of outs, right?
Yeah.
And there's always a developer, there's reasons why they may have an out. If they're along a greenway, for example, they put in a greenway and there's a very, very, very long block. Insofar as it meets the intent of what you want from the design code, they should be allowed to do it. But it's not going to be everyone.
Yeah.
What do you want to say, Mike?
Just that's also why we did the vision plan, right? So we did the vision plan, we measured all of our blocks to see if that vision plan met the fabric that worked here, and then we measured our blocks, and so that's where that came from, so.
Yeah, no, to Adam's point earlier, I completely agree with the intent behind it. It's just a question of, if there's some give and take in terms of scale, I think that provides even a latitude or a flexibility that is, would be beneficial.
But we always tell our clients too that your codes are living, breathing documents, and so the first few projects that come in, if you're consistently being asked to waive the block perimeter and people want 2,600 or 3,000 or whatever, there'll be a point where it's too large. Then you modify the code, you amend it.
Yeah, and I guess, just my kind of final point on that, from your experience, if there's a top end, and a bottom end, that would be interesting, just data points for, particularly as planning commission and council start to do their work.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that and show you, how we came up with the block structure for here, because it is more permissive than in our other places. But we also have, opportunities. If you exceed it, you have to provide a pedestrian way, or provide an open space. And if you provide an open space, you can exceed it. So there's lots of different outs for them.
That's great stuff. I appreciate that. I just thinking out loud of some potential questions that may be coming.
Yeah.
Well, I've lived 35 years in Daleview, and I live on Mayberry, but the one on the right is between Mayberry and Edward. But the one on the left is between Edward and Charles. There is no mid-block. And a lot of people, they'll ask me, why isn't there a sidewalk? And yeah. So they have to walk
all the way around. Yeah, it's a problem. Once a block gets a certain size, you want that mid-block passage, which can be, a very lively place. It doesn't have to be dark and gloomy.
Other questions, comments? Anyone else?
Go ahead, Ash. I was just going to say, earlier today, we kind of broke down the code, so we have a path forward and how we break down each element and discuss them. And should be incorporated somehow into the together.
I don't know how hard it would be to bring up the image of the property owners, the landowners.
Yep. Not hard at all.
Okay, so this is sort of building on the question Eric was asking earlier. Let's say one of the small parcels were for sale. The owner is retiring, wants to move to Florida, whatever. It goes for sale. And it's a tiny space compared to the Barnes and Noble area or the McDonald's area. What are the potential consequences for adopting form-based codes to make it difficult for him or her to be able to sell their property, given that you have all these requirements that you want the new owner to hold to, but they won't have the land size mass to do it?
So for a start, a form-based code is very beneficial to small lot owners, much more than it is now. So right now, if a property, let's just take any property owner of this property, right now they have a 0.1 FAR, they can hardly do anything. So that's their starting point. Nobody's going to buy that and redevelop it with residential or redevelop it with office because the capacity isn't there. They have setbacks, they have lot coverage, but the FAR precludes any of that from happening. And the uses may preclude it. So right off the bat, the illustrative plan gives them one idea of how they can redevelop. It's going to allow more uses than they currently have. It's going to allow more capacity than they currently have. And on a small lot, they're not going to be required to provide street connections if it's not warranted. They're not going to be required to provide, it's not as if we put a street, like, let's just take, let me zoom in here. Let's just take this area. Well, I should go to the illustrative plan.
So
Here,
while you're
let's
doing
just look
that,
this one, for example, right? This guy. It's not, this is just a suggested block structure to show you can get 4 blocks in here. But if it's not on the, see, if it's not on the green, the blue street, all we're saying here is, look, there's a street that exists here, it should connect up to here. That makes sense. We're not asking for any mandatory street connections here. We're suggesting where it should go. And when this guy redevelops, it may make sense they continue that street too, but it's completely discretionary, because it's not part of your structure plan.
a follow-up question to that. If, let's say someone wanted to purchase that lot, tear down the existing building and put up a building similar to that for a different kind of business, would they be restricted from doing that, or do they have to meet certain?
No, the only thing they would have to do is they would
density?
have to follow the form standards that they are assigned. And they will find it to be more permissive than what they're currently allowed to do. So if they're zoned, for example, mixed-use center, as you see here, they're going to have, they have a lot width of 18 feet minimum. Their setbacks are way less. There's no longer the 50-foot setback. You can go 6 feet minimum. Their lot coverage is going to be higher depending on what the use is. They're allowed to do accessory dwelling units. That's another thing. So it's way more permissive. And developers fundamentally understand that. That's why once they understand a form-based code, we tend to find developers willingly come on board, because all of a sudden they were zoned commercial, they couldn't do residential, and now all of a sudden they can. You know, there's an image here which I could pull up. I didn't show it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to pull it up here a sec. Is it this? No. It was. Yeah, hold on. Right here. Yeah. So let me unhide these two slides. Unskip. This gives you an example of what, this is what your existing density is. So you have so many parcels here that don't allow residential, right? So this all of these property owners are currently constrained by what they can do. If you were to allow residential, now all of these properties, it has nothing to do with height or density, really, it's basically just saying you could allow residential on all these parcels. So property owners are going to immediately recognize that they have more uses that they could do that are still compatible with what the general character of the place needs to be. They can do commercial if they want, they can do industrial if they want, they just have to have buildings that respect the public realm. That's really it. And
so the bottom left, the blue building, is what you can do right now. That property owner is what you can do under the code right now. Under the code we're proposing is everything on the right. The buyer of that property obviously gains huge benefits by buying that property under the new code, right?
this shows you exactly what Mike said. These are your setback limitations. This is your lot coverage, but you can't get anywhere near this. This is what you're allowed to do. So there's massive conflicts in your code right now. It's not surprising that a lot of people haven't come forth with development, because you're really capping them. Now all of a sudden they can do a whole host of different options. And if they're not on a parcel that's big enough to provide, so it's not too difficult to say, we're giving you way more capacity now and way more options, but in exchange, you're going to give us open space, or you're going to give us a street connection where we identified a need for it to be. Right. And you may decide that you want more than what we suggested in our structure plan. Mm-hmm. You know, we tried to be very conservative, and initially we had way more, but we really scaled it back. In terms of where we think those street connections need to be. But you have to begin to establish a block structure, right? That's the number one thing we identified as soon as we came here, recognizing it's going to be the hardest thing to do, but it's necessary. So if a property owner has one of those connections, well then, it's a new day. And if every other property is held to the same standard, that's okay too. Yeah.
Did I hear you earlier, you said we want to discourage drive-through structures, is that correct?
Most cities say drive-throughs should be allowed some places, not everywhere.
Okay.
So you don't want to allow drive-throughs everywhere.
Right.
There are areas where it's appropriate, and there are areas where it's not appropriate.
Okay.
So in those heavy pedestrian zones, like in and around, for example, your gateway area, you wouldn't want to allow a drive-through. but off the beaten path a little bit, you can have a drive-through. But even when you have drive-throughs, you can force the drive-through in the back. You can force the cut, the curb cut and the queuing on a secondary frontage or in the back of the lot versus the front of the lot. So when people park to go into the restaurant, they're not having to cut through the drive-through lanes. So there are ways to do that more appropriately than others. And as I said before, you become an allocator. McDonald's, you want to do a drive-through, here are your choices. You can go here, here, or here. You cannot go here, here, or here. Or if you do one, you have to do an urban one. And we know you have those prototypes.
Okay, if you could please do the suggested streets, the additional street
Yep.
image. I'm just curious, the streets that intersect with Benner Pike or with 26, would those be considered, no, I'm talking about further north.
Here? Oh, here?
A little more, yeah, those three up there, for instance. Are those existing roads or?
No, so this is one big open parcel. So you're going to have a lot of leeway on this because nothing's happened, there's nothing here, right? It's a complete blank slate.
Right.
What this is suggesting is there needs to be a loop, right? And there needs to be roads that connect to existing roads. But when and if this property redevelops, whether you buy it from the prison, whether they choose to develop it themselves, whatever it is, they also need to have a system of primary streets, because this is a huge parcel to develop, that they would have to ask, if they sell off different portions, each developer would have to connect here. This is suggesting you need at least one big central open space. Now, whether they decide to do it here or whether they decide to do it here, doesn't really matter, but it's unlike here where you have much less latitude here. But on this big parcel, and maybe we should dash it in just to show that it's not held to the same standard as everything here, simply because there's many different ways in which this could evolve.
But to capitalize on the
capacity of the mixed-use center that is applied there, they have to give things in exchange.
My question is, though, we recently did the map thing. That was the first project that was participated in the tail end of.
The official map.
Right.
Yeah.
Were those in though? Or
No.
And how do we get them in there? And
Well,
is that in 3 years?
So once everything is in place and adopted, this would be one step, is to add these to the official map. So then when someone did come in, we'd have that tool, the official map tool, where you say, okay, I want to develop this, there's a road, I need to put it in.
So you're saying you would add the structure plan to the official map? Is that how we would go with it?
I think that would be the most efficient way to approach this. Yeah, we have tried to do this on our own, without the benefit of the incorporating an overall strategy or a plan here. And there are already official map roads that exist in this area. They are not in this existing configuration. Once we've identified a configuration, and again, the way that the official map works is they're not exact locations. They are areas where we recognize that those connections need to be made, which is what we're representing on an official map. So I would tend to agree with Lindsay. Once we know where those need to be, then the official map would need to be modified in order to capture those general areas.
Okay. Ed, you had a question?
Yeah, well, one of the things, an example that you have just talked about up here is, so the general public and also all of us sitting here is, I'll just going to use the example of the existing outdoor movie theater lot, which is up on Benner Pike. Right now, that is structured in zoning as commercial, okay? With what we're looking at here, gives that property owner a lot of different options where it could be developed. It creates more value for the property owner immediately, and we might see development there. In its existing condition, you will never, I'm not going to say never, but it's very unlikely that you're going to ever see commercial development up in that area, because that's not the highest and best use. And with increased density in the things, that could be a ideal situation to do the apartments, the townhouses, then the patio homes, so on and so forth, and have a walkable area. That way, everybody here understands exactly what's being presented here.
And you have the mall right in the middle of this area, which the potential for that site is tremendous. Who knows what's going to happen, right? It may stay in its current configuration, it may happen very sequentially, or it may redevelop completely. But it is centrally located, and so eventually the site will redevelop.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Last call. Adam?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Not that the last one.
for our friends from the community that come out this evening, this is, again, this is kind of the kickoff. This is the concept kind of laid bare. But as we move forward, there are going to be multiple opportunities for folks in the community, for folks that own property, for folks that do development work in our area to participate actively in the conversations and in the discussions that are going to be had both at the Planning Commission and at council levels. And I would encourage you and encourage your peers to be involved and be engaged in those conversations. All of our agenda items for our Planning Commission as well as for council are on our website. They're readily available. We can sign you up and provide you with push notifications if that's the type of thing that you're interested in. But please be engaged and be involved. This is a game changer in terms of the types of things that we're looking to do in this area of the community. And we want to do this as much of in a partnership as we possibly can with those of you that own and operate and develop and do work in the community. So that's kind of my closing remark.
Well, and then I would just ask if maybe Lindsay just review, what's next, right? What are our next steps?
Yes, of course. So, out of tonight, as Mike mentioned, we wanted to get some information for the remand. And staff will work to take what we've learned here tonight, get it into some language for you to consider for council. And once you're prepared, and that is prepared, then we would ask you to remand this whole process then to the Planning Commission. So package it up, put it on the Planning Commission's lap, and go. It looks like all of the sections of the code, if we have 2 meetings a month, 2 hours, we can do it, there are eight sections we can do. So over 4 to 5 months, I think that this would take, the way that we broke down each section. So luckily we get, workforce housing, we're checking that off. It's coming to a close. So it looks like we'll have the opportunity for that. And possibly once that's finished, I'd anticipate a 3rd joint meeting. So then the Planning Commission can come to council and provide their findings, present everything that we've discussed, and then get your blessing.
Give us 3 months.
Yeah, and I would also agree. While I think that Lindsay has broken things down in good digestible chunks, it's going to take as long as it takes. And I think that's the important part here. If we're going to make this kind of change, and it is significant change, it needs to take time and a proper amount of time. I think that 4 months may very well be doable, and it may not, okay? But it's going to take as long as it takes for a Planning Commission to do the work that's going to be required. It's going to take time for council to evaluate that. And there, as we know, in all of our rezoning elements that we have dealt with in the past, often there's back and forth. So it's going to take as long as it takes, but I do think that it's a good roadmap about how we break things down and how we move forward.
So come the 1st of December, if we're not anywhere, we're locking ourselves in a room and getting it done.
You should be.
Nobody said that, but.
All right. Anything? There'll be no party. That'll be no ABC party.
Can I say
Go
one
ahead,
thing,
Ray.
real quick? Hearing you all talk, I wanted to just maybe leave you with two thoughts. One is another reason form-based code sort of came into play is because so many communities have gone, and municipalities have these really aspirational comprehensive plans, right, that say all the right things. And then they find out that their zoning completely precludes what they want to do. And so the reasons we find ourselves writing a lot of form-based codes is because their zoning is in complete contradiction to their comprehensive plan. That's number one. And then the other thing I just wanted to say was, just to give you a little bit of assurances about us, maybe 40% of our clients are private municipalities, 60% of our work is for developers, it's for private clients. We know exactly what it is. We believe developers should make money. We believe they should, but they should also provide a project that does your community justice, right? And I had a planning director one day say to me, this happened to be the planning director of Vancouver, which is often considered the most livable city in the world. And we asked him one day, Larry, how is it that you get developers to contribute this way? And he said something that always stuck with us, and I tell this to cities everywhere. He tells developers, it is not your right to build here, it's your privilege. Once they get into that mindset, and they realize, yes, we're going to be held to certain strict standards vis-a-vis how our building meets the street, but after that, we have way more latitude. Don't let them tell you otherwise. That's what I would want to tell you. You should really be confident that you have an area that can transform in a transformational way, and it's a really good opportunity.
Okay. Ray, did you want to say something?
Yeah, from a planning commission side, if we follow a very similar and a familiar reband process and structure that we just recently went through, I believe that's going to allow us to really evaluate this well, look at it efficiently, make it effective, and I think it'll keep us on task. I think that worked well. So if we can kind of duplicate that type of structure, I think that'll go very well for this assignment.
Great. Yeah, we will use the workforce housing remand. I think it's been a great roadmap for us, so we will definitely use that template.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to what Lindsay's saying. Right now, the intent is, staff will come back, take back what we learned here tonight, the themes, some of the discussion points that were raised. Obviously, we'll lean on our team at DPZ as well, and provide something to council, hopefully at the next meeting, to start that discussion. And it may take one, it may take two meetings for council to come to consensus on the remand letter. But the template that's been put together, I agree, it works. It's a good guide, it's a good tool, and it provides that trajectory for the Planning Commission to get off on the right foot and just build off of that momentum. So that's the intent.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you to DPZ. Excellent presentation. Very, very thankful. Thankful to staff organizing this, PC and council for your participation tonight, and then members of the public as well, listening in to our diatribes for the last 2 hours. So appreciate that. We do have one last thing in the agenda. Someone would like to move.
Move to adjourn?
Oh.
Okay. We're adjourned.